Okay, the internet loves to tell a complete fairy tale about AEW's first year. They talk about the million-plus viewers on night one, the Bleeding Rose Brothers, the John Moxley's massive surprise debut. But that narrative is completely wrong. The truth is, 6 weeks in, AEW is flatlining. Their own audience was openly rejecting Tony Khan's vision, and the company came one bad month away from becoming a total footnote instead of a revolution. To understand how close it came to falling apart, you have to understand how big the bet actually was. In September 2018, Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks ran an independent wrestling show called All In. The whole premise of the show was built around an argument. Dave Meltzer, one of the most respected journalists at the time, he said no promotion outside WWE could draw 10,000 fans to a North American show anytime soon. Yeah, the AEW Dave Meltzer. Cody Rhodes took that as a personal challenge. All In sold out over 11,000 tickets. And that was the spark. Cody became infatuated with the idea of doing it again, going double or nothing on the bet he had just won. On New Year's Day 2019, an episode of their YouTube show called The Elite, Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, and the Young Bucks announced their formation of All Elite Wrestling. They had already signed Chris Jericho, the biggest free agent in wrestling at the time. They announced their first pay-per-view would be called Double or Nothing. In May 2019, the show happened. Cody versus his real brother Dustin Rhodes in a match so violent, both men ended up covered in each other's blood. The Young Bucks against the Lucha Brothers. Kenny Omega against Chris Jericho in the main event. And then, after the final bell, John Moxley walked out of the crowd and attacked both Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho. A surprise debut that nobody actually saw coming. Dave Meltzer even called it the hottest non-WWE wrestling promotion in over 2 decades. AEW had won the first bets of its existence in spectacular fashion. The hard part was about to start though. In October 2019, AEW Dynamite debuted on TNT. This was the first time a non-WWE wrestling company has aired on national cable television in 18 years. Not since WC Monday Night Nitro went off air in March 2001. The numbers were enormous. 1.4 million viewers, the largest television debut on TNT in 5 years. It beat WWE's NXT, which debuted the very same night on USA Network. In total viewers and more than double NXT in the key demographics that advertisers care about the most. Jim Ross, Tony Schiavone, and Excalibur called the action. Schiavone, who had called the final episode of WC Nitro nearly 2 decades earlier, was back behind the national broadcast desk. It felt like history running. Cody Rhodes faced Cedric Guevara. Jake Hager debuted as a surprise. The energy in that building was a kind of electricity wrestling television had not had in years. And it should have just kept building from there. Did not. But here's what actually happened over the next 2 months. The ratings started slipping. Not collapsing, not falling off a cliff. Slipping, slowly, week after week. Tony Khan talked about this years later on a podcast, and what he said should be required listening for anyone who thinks AEW's rise was a straight line. He said after the first 6 or 7 weeks, he started to see a dip. He said this was probably around late November into December, and the trend continued through December. And he says something that very few wrestling executives are ever honest enough to admit in public. He said he did not like the way ratings were going, and the numbers were clearly telling him that the fans did not like the direction he was taking the show. The man running the company admitted, on record, that his own fans were rejecting the creative direction within the first 2 months of the show's existence. This was the Wednesday Night War. AEW debuted head-to-head every week against WWE's NXT. And in the early going, the trend was not in AEW's favor. If that decline had continued through 2020 the same way it was trending in December 2019, we would not be talking about AEW as the second biggest wrestling company in America today. We'll be talking about it as a cautionary tale, a well-funded experiment that could not sustain its own launch numbers. That is how close this came. Now, here's what Tony Khan actually did about it. And this is the part of the story that actually matters the most. He did not panic publicly. He did not blow up the roster. He did not fire his creative team. AEW took Christmas off in 2019 and came back at the start of 2020 with real changes. Khan said he made changes going into 2020 he felt very good about in terms of being more organized. He started doing the shows by hand himself rather than relying entirely on others to assemble the creative. And the result was one of the best stretches of weekly wrestling television AEW has ever produced. The build to Revolution 2020 in February is still remembered as one of the hottest creative runs in the company's history. The Chris Jericho and Inner Circle storylines were peaking. Cody Rhodes was becoming the biggest babyface on the show. The product found its rhythm. The lessons buried in the turnaround is simple and still applies to AEW today. The company has never been a finished product that simply executes a plan perfectly. It has always been a company that stumbles, recognizes stumbles, and adjusts. That happened in December 2019. It happened again during the difficult stretches of 2022 and 2023 when the Backstage drama and CM Punk situation nearly derailed the company a second time. And it happened again leading in 2026 when AEW rebuilds its pay-per-view business from ground up after 2 rocky years. This is not a company that has never had problems. This is a company that has a documented history of nearly losing the audience and finding a way to win it back. Twice now, at minimum. I'm telling you this story for a reason beyond nostalgia. Because every time AEW goes through a rough period, a section of the fan base treats it like the end. The CM Punk drama in 2023 was treated as the end. The declining attendance and dark, quiet arenas in 2024 were treated as the end. Every dip in the ratings gets framed by critics as proof the entire product was doomed from the start. But the first day of AEW's existence proves that this company has always lived close to that edge. It nearly lost its audience within 2 months of its biggest debut ever. And they recovered not through panic, but through honest self-assessment and a willingness to adjust. That is the actual DNA of the company. Not a smooth rise, a series of near misses, corrections, and recoveries. I understand that history changes how you watch AEW today. When the roster gets bloated and the title scene gets clustered and the storyline gets rushed, that is not a new failure. There is the same pattern playing out again. The same pattern that nearly sank the company in December 2019. And if the history pulls holes, it is also the same pattern that AEW has shown. More than once, it knows how to climb out of. The first year was not a clean victory. It was a company that won enormous opening bets, nearly lost the table, and pulled itself back from the edge in real time. The story is more impressive than the version anyone remembers, because surviving on a real scale and adjusting is harder than never having won at all. To summarize, AEW's first year is remembered as a triumph. 1.4 million viewers, a debut that beat WWE's NXT in every meaningful number. All of that is real. But buried underneath that triumph is a company that watched its own audience start walking away within 2 months. Tony Khan admitted it. Years later, with no spin attached. The fans did not like the direction, the numbers proved it, and the company had to change or risk becoming a footnote. They changed. They came back stronger. The run into Revolution 2020 became one of the best stretches of wrestling television AEW has ever produced. That is the real story of AEW's first year. Not a perfect launch, a company that almost lost the audience it had, just won, and figured out how to get it back. Every time AEW goes through a rough patch since then, there is a history worth remembering. They have been there before.